Today, we're waking up to something we don't talk about enough: the difference between feeling guilty about what whiteness has cost us and actually letting ourselves grieve it. We've gotten so good at guilt. Guilt keeps us defensive, keeps us stuck, keeps us circling the same conversations. But grief is different. Grief is what actually opens us up to each other, what moves us toward empathy instead of away from it. So today, we're sitting with that thread: what it means to actually mourn, not perform, not analyze, just mourn. What whiteness has done to all of us and what it's still doing to the people who aren't us. So, welcome to White Women Wake Up. I'm Karen.
And I'm Jonelle.
Each week, one of us brings a topic to the table, something we've been wrestling with, reading about, or noticing in our own lives.
And the other reacts in real time. No scripts, no prep, just an honest conversation between a mother and daughter spanning generations about what it means to wake up as white women in a world shaped by bias, power, and inherited patterns.
We don't always agree, and it's not always comfortable, but we show up anyways.
Yes, we do. Let's wake up.
Hey, Jonelle.
Hi.
Wow. Yeah, last week's topic was pretty heavy, and it's sitting. It's been sitting with me.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. Yeah, you said something interesting about just like the more that we do this work and the different mindsets it puts us in, and and this is what we signed up and committed to. There are some weeks
Yeah.
when we research and we find out things that it is really hard and overwhelming to just be a human in this world.
Yeah.
And I think but we have said time and time again that we can't shy away from the discomfort. That's what we're taught as white women, is to like move away from
Not taught, we
discomfort.
can, because the world, we can exit right now
Yes.
and we won't be by. It was like the episode a couple weeks ago when I was talking about, why do we separate people? And you're like, well, that guy probably was nice to you because you were white,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so it's like, oh
Or
man,
even it's
God.
so interesting. We had a funny conversation of, in our family, we talk a lot about we love instant gratification. My grandma was really about instant gratification. We talk about we love instant gratification. And
Who
but we
doesn't?
what? I mean, who
And who
doesn't?
doesn't?
But we are aware of that because we have definitely had some financial struggles as a family in the past. And so, like, we understand the power and the desire for instant gratification. And it was interesting. We were talking with a friend who I like was really like, "Oh, I don't care about instant gratification, like, I am fine, like, I have, the patience," and, like, just didn't even cross this person's mind, and we kinda talked about it later, not to this person because they were not in the space to have that conversation, but how they come from a very privileged resource background of a lot
Yeah.
of financial resources, just strong resources in general, so, of course, in the thing for, the awareness of instant gratification would cross their mind because everything is instant.
Yeah.
Like, nothing is they have the resources to not be comfortable, and so they don't think about that comfortability is instant
Yeah.
gratification.
I
And
I have
so
to say one thing that all of us don't think about is if you have a credit card with any balance available, you all can live with instant gratification. I remember
Oh,
when you talked about our financial issues, we didn't have any credit cards that had any balance available. We had no credit available to our name. We had nothing in our savings account, and, nothing was instant gratification.
yeah,
So it made me really think that our society is so built on credit that it has, like, my mom never used credit growing up because, first of all, she was privileged, but she also they just didn't do it. Having
yeah,
credit was not an easy thing to get, and so you did, like, layaway plans, you did other things that made you save up and
yeah.
wait. And so, it's fascinating. So any
Well,
one of us
and
that have my point is, any one of us who have a balance on a credit card that we can immediately order something on Amazon do not understand what it
Yeah,
means
but
to
not
not
even
have
that.
an instant
It's just
gratification.
everything, the availability of everything, the availability of instant gratification of information. It's
Yeah.
instant gratification of and so I don't think we don't
It's
unpack.
interesting that we're talking about this because this is what I wanted to talk about my reflection when you said
Oh,
information. So it was really interesting before you brought up the topic, you know how we get on these TikTok
yeah.
analogs or our social media feeds? Um, a couple people had been talking about the power of preserving data, which I'm a firm believer in it. I this was I have to tell a story. This is kind of creepy. I do an information design class and it's usually in January and in 2016 the students had started their project with the Obama administration. In the middle of their project when Trump was elected, every one of those data sources was offline.
Oh god, that's scary.
So, it was like with the kids and I were like, "Wow." And it's not atypical for a government to switch over data, but to shut down any of the previous data with the crossover was really bizarre. So, it made me
Oh,
think about what data we had isn't always available.
yeah.
But anyways, what I was getting at was in my TikTok or my social media feed, there was a lot of people talking about, the need to preserve good data and what are things that we know we need to be looking at data acts and things like that.
Yeah.
And honestly, it's this summer, I kind of became complacent. Like, oh, that's right. We got to think about that too. And your
Topic last
episode
week.
last week
Yeah.
was really good for me to remind me of how important good data is. Like, the
Yeah.
fact that you quoted Pew Research, man, they do good data.
Yeah.
And all of us, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or Christian, Muslim, whoever you are as a human being, please look at good data.
Well, and
It
that's a
is
really good
our
point.
commitment to learn and get good data.
And that's a really good thing that I wanna be, like, yeah, clear with our listeners if, you know I get it, not everyone always makes it to the end of a podcast, like, it happens, but we really about, I wanna say 6 months ago, really started to make sure that our audience knows the sources we are coming from and the sources and we wanna make sure that we're citing very quality, reliable sources so this is not just opinion-based conversation, and I think why that's really important, at least to me, but I think hopefully for everyone, is we have gotten lost now as a society of the difference of a fact versus opinion.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, and sorry, I know we're derailing probably from your topic, but
Oh,
we'll get
that's okay.
into it, is I started there's this creator on TikTok, and now I think she's a little condescending, though I kinda think it's funny because she's condescending to, like, the male audience, but she has a facts over feeling debate, and
Mm,
she's really clear on what facts are.
yeah.
Facts are information that either, 1, we can visually see. So she holds up a key and says, "We can all agree this is a key," right? Like, that is a fact. This is a key. The other way you get facts are by 4 credible sources,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
That's critical thinking.
And so it's really interesting because everyone always wants to come into her debates with feelings, with
Yeah.
headlines they've heard, and you can tell and they get so frustrated because she always cuts them off and she's like, "This is facts over feelings. We went over the rules." And, like, people still because we've just gotten so removed from the idea of what a fact versus a feeling is, and so, like, some of the debate that she does most often with people is that body count doesn't matter, like, so how many people you have had sex with, doesn't biologically matter because there's a lot of people who argue, like, well, it does whatever the argument is. And so anyways, I just think going back to the point of facts over feelings or opinions versus statistics, and it's something that we need to like really make sure we're understanding the difference of and getting our stats from accredited places. So
Well, and these
important to us as
TikTok
shippers.
these posts were also protecting data. So not
Yeah.
only getting them from credible sources, but as we're getting into this space where we wanna erase history or we wanna rewrite history, the erasure of things, we need to protect
Yeah.
the data.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
then speaking
Oh,
of
sorry.
history and data, again, this is kind of but just for audiences as we go down this is I think as we're unpacking in the world as it is today, we're also finding that a lot of our history was not always written in an accurate standpoint. It was written from a very whitewashed male view. And so it's interesting. Two things recently have come up is one, I read this book called Cleopatra, a novel, and it was amazing. I recommend to anyone, and it was written by an author who, is Middle Eastern. Forget I keep wanting to say Iranian, but I don't think she's Iranian because that's Persepolis, and so I am mixing it, but anyways, what she did when she researched Cleopatra, and even though it's still considered historical fiction because we only have so much information on Cleopatra, her initial thing, she lives in the US, she researched all the stuff that we probably know and have heard in the history about it. And it was very, again, whitewashed. It was very this view of Cleopatra, the seductress, all of this, like from the male gaze. And so she went to the Middle East, which is, again, Cleopatra is from Egypt. Like that is a better source to go to, is much more accurate. And the research that she found
Yeah.
on Cleopatra was just so drastically different than what we have been fed, which is a much more, as you'll find out, like Roman-centric view because they hated Cleopatra. And so it's just interesting.
Yeah.
Same thing, I started listening to this podcast called Hot History, where this woman also, like, unpacks history in, like, modern times and different perspectives, and I don't know. It's just interesting about making sure we're finding the right sources, and so this
Yeah.
woman going back to Egypt, where Cleopatra was from, to find the right sources is just a good reminder. But sorry,
Well,
so much
yeah,
derailment
yeah.
on
Of
where you're going today. I
And
just
that's
thinking
okay.
facts. Yeah.
That's okay, facts. Yeah, but it did make me think that. Okay, as you know, a good friend passed away,
Yeah.
and, for anyone who's lost a loved one or has gone through the experience of a terminal illness
Yeah.
or an aging parent,
Yeah.
a loss of a child. First of all, plug for Anderson Cooper's podcast, is amazing. It's on grief. But, there's a huge mourning. So when I'm talking about mourning, I'm talking about the mourning. So just take a second and sit in your body. So we were talking about facts and feelings. This can be a feeling topic
Okay.
today.
Okay.
We're in feelings.
Yeah, last week was facts, today is
This
feeling.
is feelings.
Great. Great that we're identifying.
Because I want you to identify we're gonna talk a little bit about white grief,
Yeah.
and I want you to think about what it feels to mourn, what it actually feels to mourn your loved one. So, take a few minutes, take a deep breath, get into your body, and tell me what your physiology is doing right now. What are you doing in that morning?
Okay. Um, tell me more. Okay, my eyes are closed. I'm in my body. I
So
think
reflect on both you and I really mourned and we grieved but we really mourned when your
Yeah.
grandma my mother died. What were some of the things that you
Ooh.
physically went through in the space you were in?
I I mean, oh my god, could still almost cry about
Yeah.
I mean, mourning a loved one, even a grandparent who has lived a lovely life, and unfortunately, your friend, this was a really sad and young passing, and so it's a different perspective, but, like, I mean,
But I
I
think there are some universal elements
yeah,
of
yeah.
grief and
Well,
mourning.
this is what I was trying to say
And
is,
so
like,
maybe
I think people want to separate it because they don't like the uncomfortability. They want
yeah.
to separate it. They wanna say, "Oh, but she had a great life because she was older and she needed to go," and so they want to
So
separate
that's
the 2, but
interesting. Right away, we go to the buts,
yes.
right? That's
Yeah.
so fascinating that you should say that because that's not because I'm in this space of mourning.
Because again, it's the
So
instant gratification of moving out of discomfort. People want
yeah.
they don't wanna be in discomfort. They don't know how to support you, and but they also want but they want you to be out of discomfort, and
Yeah.
they don't know how to move past that. It was
So let me ask you this. When you mourn, so for me, let me couch it this way. When I mourn in this space, I go internal and there's a guttural response. There's kind of
yeah,
a shallowness in my shoulders. It's really kind of almost like punching into a cave
yeah,
when I mourn. There's tears shedded. Um, I prefer a private space
yeah,
rather than a public space, and yet I know there's times for both because
yeah,
a wake or funeral or those are important. But when I think about mourning my mother, those are the feelings that come to my heart.
yeah.
What are the feelings? When you think about when you mourn, what are the feelings that come to your heart?
Well, I mean, I think you just said it,
Was
and
it sa
I
I
thi
don't know, I'm just asking because I know that you and my sister definitely had more of an outward display
but
of
that's not a
tears.
feeling, that's a reaction.
Okay, got it.
We had the
Got it.
same feelings. We had
Got it.
our reaction where, like you said, you went internal. Our reactions were guttural cries
And
kind of thing. It was this, like, full body,
yes,
just
yes,
breakdown
yes.
kind of thing, and so, I mean, that I think
So
that's different than the feelings, that's a
so
reaction.
here's what
The
I wanna
feeling is still overwhelmness, the feeling is sadness, the feeling is, like, confusion and longing, and I mean, it's all of it, it's the stages, it's partly anger, it's just it's so much. I mean, and again, it's dependent on the situation, but there's still all of that wrapped up in grief.
okay, so that's the feeling I want us to hold. And now that we've had that feeling, whenever we know someone has passed, like, that feeling now becomes very empathetic for other people. I sense I thought I knew mourning, but when my mother died, I knew grief and
Mourning.
mourning.
Yes.
And that feeling,
We
whether
talked about it, it becomes a
yeah,
club where
it
people were
becomes a club.
but what I've
Oh
noticed
my gosh, I forgot we talked about it becomes a club because I wanna intro that into this new
but
space.
here's the deal, what I've noticed, actually, it becomes a club for people who allow themselves to have the feelings of grief. Because
Yes.
what I have then found is, like, I then you come across someone who is in the club, and so I'm like, "Okay, we're in the same understanding of this empathetic level," as you said, and but what I've been finding so often is, we don't again, because we don't like uncomfortability,
Yeah.
we don't allow ourselves to have the authentic full reaction. We're
Yeah.
still like there are so many people who I've talked to who are still like when they go through grief are still with the buts. The but this, the but they
Yeah.
had a great life, but they were really sick at the end, but they were really this. And so it is interesting of again how, and I'm not trying to say that these people were wrong in their response. I get it. Being uncomfortable is awful. Grief
Yeah.
it's just
It's
ripped
heavy.
through your
It's
body.
heavy.
It's heavy.
But it
But
also
but
you like
it yeah.
it's what you said. I love so this is what made me think about it. And I wanted to think about it in relationship to our topic of racism,
Yeah.
of any kind of isms,
Yeah.
right? Anytime,
Well, I love that you
well,
say at
and
the
I
beginning,
wanted to
white
talk
grief,
yeah.
because I think this is a little bit like my topic last week of like, I
Yeah.
was so mad at our country. And again, so mad. And how do you kind of balance this with I want to love, and we're in the World Cup. We're in this camaraderie, even though we lost the World Cup yesterday, then so like in like, the other day. And so but you want to have this like nation pride for the things that we do love about our
Yeah.
country. And yet, this grief, when you start to unpack things, is just so overwhelming. And
Yeah.
how do you have
When in
so
fact
anyways, I liked how you framed that with the white grief
yeah.
of, and we've talked about this even before of like my grief of Christianity. Like I still have an amazing faith and relationship with God, but I have grieved my space, my time, my moment in a community that doesn't love everyone. And that's been really hard for me to again have the grief around that. Have the grief around the college that I went to and I loved, but it is a Southern Baptist school and the grief of that. So anyways, I love that you're
Well, okay, so
the grief
it's
of being a white woman and
yeah.
how we have caused so much pain and hurt and how I still have to stand in that as a representation of that hurt. Well, I also want to love and reach out, but be respectful that people may people of color may never trust me. They may never actually like and accept me. And I have to be okay with that uncomfortability
Yeah.
and still give fully and support fully, even without the love and embrace back. And
Yeah. So,
sorry.
what you said, like, okay, so let me tell you why, how I kind of came to this or started thinking or invested, why I was curious about it is, you know, I am religious and it's hard to say I'm a devout Christian given what I'm not a Christian nationalism at all.
Yeah.
I loved, what was it? I'm from the generous Christian movement. I loved
Oh,
that
I
one.
haven't heard that.
But,
Okay.
I love this language. So I read up, I read, Daily Meditation by Richard Rohr from the Center of Action and Contemplation. And he called so they were focusing on the text, the Beatitude text, "Blessed are those that, are poor in spirit." And he referenced this language of the weeping class.
Yeah.
And he said, this desire for the weeping
Interesting.
class. And it's not the wealthy class, it's not the poverty class. So when we're talking about it's not a class on weeping, it's a society that weeps. And I loved when you said it's like you're part of a club, right?
Mhm.
And when we truly weep, so a lot of times we get our ideas in combination of things. I
Yeah.
was also watching this TikTok of when someone truly lives in the space, they can empathize
Yes.
rather than sympathize.
Yeah.
So, this idea of weeping class, if we truly, truly mourn and we truly, truly grieve, like you're
Yeah.
talking about this guttural feeling. And what we're grieving is whiteness. We're grieving whiteness. And what I mean by whiteness is like what you were talking about last week, these institutional things that have truly harmed. human beings.
Well, I
And
I
so
think
is
it
it the institution of slavery? Is it the government institution of not caring for our sick? Is it institutional things? So whiteness is a systematic
is
space of favoring
is
white
that what
human
we're
beings.
grieving, or is that what we're embarrassed of, what we're ashamed of? I don't know if
Well,
that's
I
what we're
think I'm
grieving.
grieving. Okay, so when I
So
talk about grieving, okay,
my perspective of, and hear me 'cause maybe I'm hearing you wrong, is my perspective is we're grieving our identity and that we had within whiteness, the
yes.
things that we view as our positive, like,
Well, I think we're
heritage.
grieving
And
a
so I
couple
think,
things. I don't know if
'cause
I'm
I think
grieving
we're
that.
ashamed of the things that you talked about. I think we're ashamed of those things. I
No,
don't know if
I'm grieving
we're grieving the
my
ideology of who we were supposed to be, who we
yes,
are.
yes and no. I'm grieving the pain that I was complicit in because of my whiteness
Okay.
in inflicting harm on someone else. I'm not I'm there is a complete despondency, what I described, the weeping
Yeah,
class.
no, I understand. I'm just curi and this is not, I'm like,
I'm
maybe.
not grieving my white identity. And this is interesting because I have done some research on the language of what we call whiteness versus being white. Being white, we can't help being white, we're white. I'm not that I'm saying I
So
like the identity of whiteness or of what we've associated ourselves with, but when we talk about whiteness, whiteness is a systemic oppression.
yeah.
It's a language, it's a system that has consistently oppressed
So I
others
think this is why I'm
that are
confused
not
about the
majority.
use of grief for what you're saying. You're grieving, because grieving is the emotional and physical and behavior response to loss.
Yes.
So, but
So
this is
there's
my
a
point, but
loss.
you didn't lose your
I see what you're
complacency.
saying. I lost my identity.
You
I
lost your
lost my
identity. You're
identity. You're
grieving
right.
your identity,
And yet
and
I'm
you're
also
disappointed
grieving.
and you're sad, but that's not grieving, because you didn't lose your complacency. You're ashamed, you're disappointed, you're sad,
Well,
you're hurt.
the thing is, maybe what I'm saying is I'm mourning the death of what could be.
Yes, that's grief.
Okay,
That
that's
okay.
grief. I'm
Yeah.
mourning the death of what can be and what has
And the
kept it
death
from being.
and the
Okay,
death of what
wait.
you thought, what you
No, no,
thought.
no. Hang on.
Oh,
Let me say I'm mourning for what could be, and I'm mourning for what can be because these systems have been in place that oppress that being. Like already, you and I have, by learning about indigenous governments, matriarchal values, different systematic ways of living in this world,
yeah.
and ways that could bring fruit and
Yeah.
wholeness,
Yeah.
and our whiteness has chosen the opposite.
Yeah.
So I'm grieving
Yeah.
what could be.
There we go.
And many yeah,
That makes sense. Okay,
and I'm
that makes
grieving
sense.
what could be. I'm weeping for what could be.
Yeah.
And okay, so let me go on.
Yeah, sorry.
And by sitting in that mourning, I'm not I'm not I'm not languishing on guilt or shame or sad, desolate. I'm just being.
Yeah.
I'm just being. And like you said, there's something about when you're just being and other people are just being. There is a club, and this club of weeping for what it could be, right? And it's different. It's not Black grief because
No, but
Black grief is
here's
grieving for what their loss. My grief is and okay, so the problem is and here's the
Yeah.
challenge.
I was like, "Where are
The
you going with this?"
the
Because
problem is when I live in shame and when I'm living guilt and I use words like, "I did something wrong, look at me, I'm bad about it," I become indifferent. I want to
yeah.
I want to say, "But." But when I live in grief, it says there's really something that was lost. There's real and what I say is lost is what could be.
Yeah. My
So it's
fear with
different.
this conversation, and maybe you're getting there, is it sounds still like we're allowing ourselves and listeners to still sit in center themselves.
But the
And so I
problem
think
is
where I
we
wanna go, I think I where I'm curious with grief is, I think then ways to separate grief from sitting in the grief, because I don't know if that's kinda where you're going, is
so
like,
so
grief
here's where I wanna
has
go with it.
cycles. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So when we feel white guilt or white shame, I think we might acknowledge the racism. I think we might talk about, like, the systems, but do we actually go to that space of grieving? Like, when I'm grieving my friend who recently passed away, I'm thinking about her.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm
I have an
seeing
interesting
her.
you're
I'm
telling story.
feeling her. I'm
You're
telling stories about her. I'm thinking about what could have
ooh.
been with her. So when I'm talking about truly grieving
Well, and
what
that
whiteness brought white people and what whiteness has brought Black people, that pain, I wanna talk about what
well, I was about to say, you
did.
hit an interesting kind of analogy there of, like, when we are ashamed of things, when we are guilty of stuff, kinda like you're talking about sitting in that, you wanna hide that, to your point.
Mhm.
It's not even indifference,
I
it's
wanna
actually
fix it
hiding.
right away.
You either wanna fix it in inappropriate ways that are not sitting and listening to the problem, you want to, like, a great example, I had a really hard time the other day with a family and friends, and I actually it sent me into, like, a full panic attack. Like, I took myself out of the situation, but it was the disconnect of my autism, and it was annoying, whatever. And I have not had a panic attack in, like, 10 years, but I was really stuck in this loop, and my friend came and sat with me, and instead of fixing it, she just sat with me and
Y
was
and
like,
that's what you
moment
do in grief.
yes, and that there were moments, and so anyways, but my point is it grief does, you're right, it builds a community, so kinda like what you're saying, it's a shame and discomfort you wanna hide away, like, a
Yeah,
lot of what happened in this situation, the friends who didn't check on me wanted just to ignore it, like, there was no
it's
conversation
done.
afterwards, it was done, it was over, it was separated, it was the and so that is the shame, that is discomfort, I'm sure there was shame in their behavior, but whatever, but with grief, kinda like you said, you when you're in grief, you wanna share stories of the
Yeah,
person. You wanna show pictures, and so that's kind of you're right, what we're doing here. We have been grieving, white grieving for a while. We have been unpacking all of this
and
stuff.
there's
I
love on the lost ones,
Yeah, and
like,
so
I
instead of hiding it, we wanna share with everyone. We wanna
oh
share
gosh, I
this
know.
grief,
We are the
this white
weeping
grief.
class.
This, like,
Yeah,
we want to share of people. This is white women wake up, like, wake up to the grief. This is what's happening. Like, this is
yeah,
and so, okay, I'm getting what you're saying because that is such an
and what
interesting
we're I
analogy of, like, when you really let yourself like, again, back to the club situation, the people who are letting themselves grieve are the people who, like we're saying, get this. You wanna hear their stories, you wanna talk. The people that are in the club who are not letting themselves grieve appropriately are pushing it away. They're not sharing,
and
they're not and it's not a
I also
judgment on how
yeah,
people move through emotions, but it is an interesting statement of how we deal with hard things, and in this world, when we are really seeing more and more every day of the effects of our whiteness, and again, I've been reading a lot about, like and we've talked about this, like, the white feminist narrative and how,
mhm,
again, it still centers that because
God.
it
Well,
centers us, and because women are oppressed, we automatically, like, get a pass on things, and that's not true. Like, we still need to be held accountable to our whiteness, even if we have oppression in our gender, and so it's this intersectionality of but, yeah, but we don't let ourselves be in that grief space of
well, and one of
sharing
the
and
things that I think
uncovering.
is also important in understanding, like, if we become a weeping class, there are differences in the grief, right? Like, my friend's husband
Yeah.
is grieving very differently for my friend than I am.
Yes.
And so in this weeping class, the oppressed, people who are feeling less than, Blacks,
Yeah.
marginalized people, are weeping very differently than I am.
Yes.
And so that, like, it's
And that's the intersectionality,
shifting.
because this is what people are talking about with white feminism, is then there's all of this now there's all this information out about the patriarchy and our
Yeah,
oppression, and so we are associating our grief as the same
and it's
as every
not.
other woman, and it's
But
not the
but
same, and we're
when
not.
you think about, okay, so what I wanna say is, just thinking about the physicality of grieving, you know now what it means when your really close loved one, someone you daily interacted with, passed away and
Yeah.
died. You know that guttural feeling. That feeling, but now when you interact with someone who is experiencing that immediate feeling of loss or that loss, you don't fix them. You don't try to make them someone different. You sit next to them and let them
Yeah.
be a human being.
Yes.
And this is what I'm saying
Yes.
is I think I am grieving what could be. I am grieving the identity that I thought I had in whiteness.
Yeah.
I am grieving the systems that we still have in place.
Yeah.
I'm grieving that we're so slow. And at the same time, I understand that my grieving is there, whereas someone who's in the middle
Yes.
of poverty, oppression, um,
Racism.
Black or a religious
LGBT, sexual identity
diversity,
oppression.
identity, ableism, their grief is here.
Well, and I think
And
that's
I
a
can
really
empathize, but there's we're in a club, but I understand that there's differences
well,
within the
and I think
framework of that club.
it's a great space. It's funny, audience. I taught Karen about analogies like a decade ago, and then she overdoes analogies sometimes. And so now usually I'm just like, stop with the analogies. But I think this is such a great, or at least for me, and I hope for audience members, a great correlation and understanding of like the intersectionality and the complexity, or I guess I should just say like the dimensional complexity of where you can be in grief in this world of oppression. And so your analogy of like you would never go to the husband of
Oh,
your friend and say, "Oh, I completely understand what you're going through." And
no.
unfortunately, a lot of people do that stuff, but,
They
like,
do.
the
Well,
point is
that's part of the problem, right?
yeah,
And
but the
that's a
point
good
is,
analogy of the
you
problem.
you know that, like, your grief is not on that level, and so, again, then
But
seeing
see,
ourselves against others is, like, it's in this same world that we have been talking to a lot of white men recently who are constantly feeling the grief of their identity. They're
mhm.
they're unpacking this now of, like, what it means to be a white man in this world, and they're really struggling with it, and yet they continue to want to put it
Well,
on
we all
the
do.
same level, the same term.
Whiteness,
No, but
all do.
I'm just talking about our conversations lately. Just let me say this. And but it's common, and I think the thing is, it goes back to like why we started this podcast, this channel, is the same way that white men are asking us to hold their grief is we were asking women of color to hold our grief.
Yep.
Basically, what they told us is, "No, figure your grief out amongst yourself.
Yeah.
We cannot hold your grief for you." And so it's what I'm trying to
Well,
say
I
here
think
is similar way with these white men that we're experiencing is as they're opening up, as they're trying to figure this out,
yeah.
they want us to hold their grief in this situation. And at least and you're a little bit more willing to do it. I'm in a place where I'm like, I no, I have enough. I can't hold your grief. Find a space of your own to hold your grief
Yeah.
together and talk through these things. But like don't put that onus and ownership on me in the same way you wouldn't put that ownership. You would never go to your friend's husband and put your grief on him in this time
Yeah.
frame because it's there's no way he has the capacity to hold that. And so I really do like how you that
Well,
analogy that you threw.
and I wanted to say too because okay, so in 2007, Matwa Matwani wrote a paper called "When White Women Cry: How White Women Tears Oppress Women of Color."
Yeah.
Um, when a white woman cries in a hard conversation, her pain becomes a visible thing in the room. It becomes real, it becomes legitimate. Everyone rushes to comfort her. And the person who is actually harmed, their reality goes invisible, it gets overlooked. Sometimes it even gets pathologized, like they're the ones being difficult.
Yes.
I think where the grieving thing, the weeping class helped me is as a white woman, sometimes I can go to tears, and I wasn't understanding those differences. Well, in that context, I was going tears because I was sad.
Yeah.
Sadness is very different
Very
than
different.
mourning. Mourning is a guttural, um, there's a in if
Well,
you have never experienced true loss, it's difficult to describe what mourning feels
yeah.
like.
Well, and but
And
there's all
this
there
is what I want us to try to tap into, so that as we mourn and as we grieve, we will be able to talk about racism. We
yeah.
will be able to talk about oppression. We will be able to talk about what the system of whiteness has done to harm this world and has harmed us.
Yeah.
Because truthfully, I
Oh,
would have
yeah.
loved to have grown up in a different kind of governmental system. And I didn't. I grew
Well,
up
look at
with
even the
a
conversation I had
yeah,
last week about how our whiteness, our our racism that
yeah,
that has led us to this horrible healthcare system that we have today,
yeah,
all because people did not want desegregated hospitals.
yeah.
And so it's just again like this
And we're not doing any better. I mean, I
oh,
think that that's the other part too is maybe that's the other thing is, like, you talk about what am I grieving? You know, there was, like, this complacency, innocence that I had a sense that we were getting better. I had
yeah,
no idea my sister-in-law was racist until Obama was elected, and then it came out, and so we're not getting better, it's
no,
getting exposed, and I'm at my heart is holding heavy,
yeah.
and, so anyways,
But
I
we're
love
holding
that
heavy
language.
in this space of white women. We are not putting our grief on others.
No,
That's
no,
we need to be really clear. We
yeah,
are here
so
to have a conversation amongst us. We don't wanna
yeah,
center ourselves, but we can hold our grief here, so then we can go out and
yeah,
support and
I
hold
so
others' grief,
I
because
have
we want to
3
make sure we hold the grief of others. You need to be here for your friend's husband. You don't want to put grief on him. You need to hold his grief. In the
yes,
same way, we need to hold the grief of others.
so 3 specific tangible outcomes. Name the specific loss, not the abstract guilt. Don't sit there feeling vaguely bad about racism in general. Get specific. And I really loved what you called me to do. Get specific. What am I grieving? I'm grieving what could be, which is love, which is respect, which is care for human beings,
Yeah.
which is looking at government systems that are putting in healthcare, are putting in daycare, are allowing people to flourish.
Yeah.
I'm missing a generous Christianity. I'm missing that, a generous love.
Oh,
Number 2,
God, I know.
direct it towards repair and not display. So it reminded we had another friend who lost a house in the recent fire, and you said, "Mom, start making meals." I
Yeah.
love that.
I
Well, I guess that might be display, not repair. Repair would be building the house, but direct it towards repair. The question is, what is one real thing I can do with it? And then number 3, grieving community, not a solo performance. Call someone, sit with someone. Don't post it before you process it. And I think that that's what I would love to say that we are, is a weeping community,
Yeah.
one that understands the grief that we've
Yeah.
lost with whiteness, the culture of whiteness, but one that truly holds up the grief of those who have been oppressed.
Well, and
So,
I love that. I didn't understand weeping community at first, but you are right. Like, this is in an essence what we wanted. Like, we started out as wanting to educate ourselves and educating other white women, but as we go, we've always been trying to figure out how to make this space without centering white women, like, what does that look like?
yeah.
And calling it a weeping community of it is. It's this place that you can find respite. You can come back, you can weep and grieve together in what our white communities have done to oppress others, to harm
You can
ourselves,
call it out.
all of the above. And then yet, then we can take that respite to then hold the grief of our sisters outside of this space, and I
Yeah.
think I kinda I love that. I love that sense of this weeping community, and so
Well,
it's
I
not
even
about feeling
I
bad
love
for
that they called
ourselves.
it I love that he called it a weeping class because
Oh, class.
it feels like you own that space.
Yeah,
And, the other thing about mourning, as I've been mourning the loss of my friends, is our hearts are big.
yeah,
We can still find, there's still joy and there's still
yeah,
love, and then there's real vulnerability.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that's what I get to.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So,
But it's not about wallowing, it's about grief and then support.
yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Janelle.
Yeah, thank you.
So thanks for joining us at White Women Wake Up. We hope today's conversation sparks something in you, whether it's reflection, a new question, a deeper commitment to showing up with empathy and accountability. If you found this episode meaningful, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You can also connect with us on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Substack, or at whitewomenwakeup.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts and keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay curious, be open, and let's keep waking up together. Bye. Before we go, quick playback on where today's research came from. The grief versus grievance framework is from Juliet Hooker's book, Black Grief, White Grievance, Princeton University Press. The 5 stages of defensive white grief were named by scholar Michael Eric Dyson. The term for tears functioning as a tool that centers white distress comes from Matwani Akapadi's 2007 paper, When White Women Cry. And the somatic healing framework is from Rasna Menachem's My Grandmother's Hands. And all these links will be in the show notes. Thank you for sitting with us on this one. Keep waking up.
Keep waking up. Bye.